You're listening to Two Beers Until Phronesis, a philosophy podcast for students, graduates, and anyone else interested in ideas. Alongside regular guests and friends, we discuss some of life's big questions over a few beers. Enjoy.
What have you reading this week? We'll go like a catchphrase. What's the book? Just what's the book, Sam? What's the ancient book?
Hey Sam, what's the ancient book you've been reading today called?
Today's ancient book is The Art of War by Sun Tzu.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's a pretty good book. Although I kind of just described it as the most depressing book, more depressing than the other one, which was Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, which is also not a depressing book.
I'm sure everybody remembers that episode fondly.
Yep, I'm sure our listener, singular,
yes, me.
Is
not even you.
Just listen. Yeah, too far. I listened back to the first 2 minutes of the Stoicism thing. I was like, wow, this guy's nice. And I now 2 weeks on have completely different point of views.
Yeah, because with the Stoicism one, I kind of knew a little bit about Stoicism because I studied a little bit because it's obviously like a Western thing, and I studied philosophy, so it's like I've come across it before, and I come across it in humanism and other things. But then, this I have no context for this stuff. Obviously, I did a little bit of reading to get my head around it when you said
some of the quotes and whatever.
Yeah, but because I don't know anything about like ancient Chinese history, or it's like completely different philosophy, completely different period of history.
Yeah, it's a different sort of slant on the world. And the thing about this is like, this is one of those books that everyone knows of, and it's mentioned in every sort of like facet. I know like it's used in business a lot. People use it in sports teams. It's one of those books that everyone, if someone's writing a screenplay and they've got a director who's coming in and the story is he takes over a business and turns it around, that maybe they might throw this book out because everyone's aware of it. But they haven't actually read it or understand sort of what it's about. And I think the cool thing about it is it's sort of like a treatise on like common sense and like how to think. And it's like there's never any bit of this where I'm like, oh wow, there's no mind blowing bit where it's talking about like cavalry formations or something. It's just very sort of
it's very fundamental. Yeah, like evaluate the battlefield and everything.
Yeah, and things that can transition really easily just into your everyday life and your everyday way of thinking.
Yeah, because I was kind of thinking, well, how does this instruction book on how to wage war, why are civilians in like over 2,000 years later reading this?
This is why the fuck are you reading this?
Yeah, but then I read a bit. I was like, I can see how this. Some of it is indirect. You have to kind of like with the business stuff. I think you do have to kind of.
You have to map it onto what you know, and this brings us on to this. There was another book that I wanted to do, which is the Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi, which I did start reading. It was like, okay, this is just too stupid. It's either really vague, and I'm not clever enough to understand it, which is like that could be a factor, or it's just like very literal and it's just about stabbing people. But Miyamoto Musashi has this amazing quote, which is, once you know the way broadly, you see in all things, which is a fantastic quote because it's like, once you have a good understanding of one thing, you then instantaneously map everything to that. And it's like, I'm reading this book, every single thing I was mapping either to teaching or like jiu-jitsu or just like anything or planning, because those are like the three things that I do. Like if you were to put a bet on if I was doing one of three things, it would be those things at any point, or like sleeping.
You don't eat, you just jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, that's how I get my sustenance. I get my sustenance by fucking I plan to eat.
Yeah, so I think we need to sort of go through the context.
Let's take a step back.
So, first of all, so who was this guy and when was he writing?
This brings on to another point which I think he talks about in the Pre-Socratics, which is the fact that Sun Tzu probably wasn't actually a person. So Sun Tzu was apparently, his name was actually Sun Wu, so he was of the Wu nation, and this was a period of time when China was split up into loads of rival...
Yeah, seven kingdoms. They were all warring, so Wu was one of these kingdoms.
Wu was one of those kingdoms, and it's actually like, I think later on in martial history, Wu became like a symbol for war. Yeah. And they sort of, all their colours are red and everything. So,
and this is roughly sort of 500 BC.
500 BC-ish. They say like the common reign is like 450 to 536, but in the same way that like the Pre-Socratics was sort of like a collection of the knowledge that came before, and sort of in the same way that Freud is like I guess like a scientific version of folk tales and everything, all this pre-knowledge. Or in the same way, Shakespeare didn't invent all these words, but he was just the first to coin it. Sun Tzu is just writing down all these military tactics and ways of thinking that obviously have come before him. And also, like, he wasn't just one person. People sort of added onto it as the years went by.
Yeah, so...
Like the Bible or something like that.
Yeah, so this is 500 BC that he was supposed to have written this, or came up with it, and maybe it was orally passed. Well, the first known writing we have of it is 200 AD in the Han Dynasty, and that's got about a third of what we know now from it. So it's obviously been adapted and changed.
Yeah, and also there's like a whole another section that looked like someone transcribing it was like, oh, this is cool, we'll add that on. So there's a couple of things which is like Sun Tzu probably wasn't the person. That's like problem number one. Problem number two is translation from Chinese. No one agrees what's written down. If you get 4 books or 4 copies of The Art of War, they're all probably different. They all probably have loads of different interpretations. In fact, the interpretations, and people when they read it with commentator notes from other generals who have then interpreted it over the years and sort of try to break down some of these quite apparently in the original Chinese is actually quite cryptic. So right. And it therefore makes it quite open to interpretation. So there's like, for example, there's loads of lines where one person take a completely different meaning to another person. So that's like problem 2. We've got Sun Tzu's not being a real person. The fact it's have written down in ancient Chinese, which is hard enough to translate into Chinese, let alone into English. And the third problem is it's also written for a person. So it's written for, who's it written for? It was written
King
for...
Helu?
Yeah, Holu.
Yeah.
I've only ever seen that name written down. Please don't stab me, internet people. He was the king of the Wu state, and basically Sun Tzu was apparently the mythical character Sun Tzu was a fantastic general, and he wrote down all of his teachings so he could pass it on to this king. And what's quite funny is after he wrote this down, they lost a load of battles, and then the kingdom got destroyed.
Yeah,
so it's kind of like it wasn't that. Well,
he won the battle of he won one great victory. Can't remember what that was, but Beaujeu, something like that.
So they won the battle, but they didn't win the war.
No,
they didn't last as a kingdom.
But because eventually out of this warring states period, you got the first emperor.
Yeah.
Who was Qin Shi Huang, and he's the guy who buried with all the terracotta stuff, and he's allegedly said that this book was what enabled him to become the emperor. He's like, I want to give a big shout out to this book.
Shout out to our boy Thales.
Couldn't have got here without this book. So yeah,
that's almost like a sneak diss throwback to Wu. It's like as a kingdom that you've conquered or that you've unified, which probably means conquered. It's like, oh yeah, shout out to one of the kingdoms whose book helped me do this.
But yeah, so this is like the context in what war was like in this time. This is like Iron Age kind of stuff for China. This is like iron weapons.
Well, they were sort of in the stage of warfare. It's sort of like pre-Hellenic, that sort of era of Greece. They still had chariots, and everything was built around the chariots. You'd have a chariot, and then you'd have like 75 infantry for each chariot, and then you would have like just infantry, archers, and then charioteers.
And then what's different, like from some of the stuff before, is that some of the towns are able to field like thousands of blokes. Some of the states, at least 2 of them, are able to like have these massive fucking armies. So it's like warfare is evolving, and so you have more professional soldiers. The role of advisor is now kind of like a thing because you have more professional.
Yeah, the army has more of a structure, and also like, but the thing is, they're still dealing with conscripts. So what's quite different between sort of current military is now sort of done on a voluntary basis, where you go, I'd like to sign up and enlist, and back then they were just literally either people were being living in such bad conditions that they would join the army just for food, or they just literally sort of round up a load of people in the same way that, you know, the British people used to sort of they would put like a shilling in someone's beer cup, and then they've taken the Queen's shilling and they're like, alright, yeah, you've got to serve on the ships now.
Save the Queen!
Yeah, literally, it's where, I imagine that's where it comes from. But it's just like, oh yeah, you now enlisted, you took the shilling, you had it in your beer mug. And it's like, oh great, cool. So yeah, the way...
but were they drinking with their left hand? Because that's... It's like, no, I'm going to join the army now, mate. You know.
Yeah, I went on a lads night out, and now I'm serving fucking Mogadishu for like 4 years.
That's grim.
The way this is written, I seem to gravitate towards books like this because it's like every single quote, so you could probably just do a podcast on each one. and they're so like slight in the fact that you can just read it and be like, oh yeah, of course. But also it's like when you take it away and sort of digest them and think about them, it's quite each quote has a lot to give you. And it's this thing of like that we seem to be rediscovering knowledge from the past, which I guess is like a key idea, that how come the things that we're reading from 2,500 years ago we haven't actually managed to get straight in our heads yet? And how come we haven't actually managed to get things which are common sense? And this is obviously not just about like the relationship between war and life is like one that's sort of clearly made, and you can make relations to your own life. Or how come we haven't incorporated these ideas into the way that we act now, which is like 2,500 years later, which is weird. Or the way we look back and see past knowledge.
Yeah, you were saying about some of the stuff like Jordan Peterson, how that's like basically just a rediscovery of knowledge, and how
literally
people are just latching onto rediscoveries of knowledge and reiterations of knowledge. And
but it's the thing is, like, I remember you told me about reading 12 Rules for Life, and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And it's not like, it's like this thing of, it's not that the things are like mind blowing, it's just we're not thinking about them. We're either too distracted or we're just not going over those things. It's like things like, I don't know, one of the Jordan Peterson thing would be like, surround yourself with people that are good for you, or who want like the best for you.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure Spinoza says something almost exactly like that. It's like just surround yourself with people who make you more like you.
Yeah, and the same thing could be put in an Instagram bubble and just chucked out as like a thing that thousands of people would share and like, but then they still won't actually do that. And it's like that's the hard bit, is incorporating some of these ideas into your life and actually using them, rather than just going, oh, that's cool. And I think this is why I was giving up the what did I say this podcast should be called? It was like we want instant gratification, we don't want to work at things or think about things. It was like 14, you won't believe 14 ways Sun Tzu can help you enrich your life and get ripped abs in 14 weeks or some shit like that.
For the thumbnail, I'll just put like Sun Tzu's text and then like all the Chinese letters and stuff, and just put a big red clickbait circle. You won't believe what you missed.
Yeah, literally, it's like Sun Tzu's silhouette blacked out, and then a big question mark going, you're an idiot if you don't click this.
Yeah,
and you're like, no.
13 chapters, number 5 will shock you.
Oh, dude, it's actually awful. Yeah, clickbait's great.
Have you heard the story of the concubines?
I have not. This sounds like a joke.
Okay,
I've got some good stories in there. There's one about.
So we don't know anything about Sun Tzu. I mean, the normal, because we normally say on this podcast, like, imagine a big question mark at the end of everything we say. Imagine 5 for all the historical stuff, because like we don't know. No one knows.
It's like the painting and the statue. It just looks like he literally looks like a disguise. He's literally just got like a round face that could be anyone's. It's nondescript. He's just got a mustache that looks like fake. He literally looks like one of the fucking Marx Brothers.
It's just like, imagine all the Chinese soldiers lining up, and there's one in like a Groucho Marx.
Yeah, literally. That's what, he's Chinese Groucho Marx. So Chinese Groucho Marx wrote this book, and it's Concubine.
Like a fake beard. Yeah. So basically, yeah, he came from like this town which was kind of up and coming. It was a little bit like Manchester 5 years ago, and it had all the vape bars opening. Because obviously, it's just outside of. It's just outside of Shanghai. Yeah. So we think of that as like central China, but in this, it was like in this period, it was kind of outside, and he's up and coming, and like, yeah, there are more taxes, more affluence and wealth. So he's like, I fancy myself as a bit of an advisor. So I'm gonna go to the king, and when he was offered this job, king was like, show me what you can do. You have heard this. Yeah. He's like, show me what you can do. So he's like, all right, I will, but you've got to give me complete control over this situation. And he's like, yeah, whatever. He's like, you mean it? Yeah, sure, okay, right. So I'm going to get like 400 of your concubines, which is mental. Like 400 odd.
That's too many. I think there's a point where you're like, have I got too many concubines? You know when you got like, I'm looking at your DVD collection here and you're looking, oh, that's quite a lot of DVDs, that's too many. When you got 400 concubines... This is just jealousy talking.
The knob must have been like... Anyway.
Non-existent. Yeah. That's why Sun Tzu was like, he could take 400 of his hands, he didn't even notice. Yeah. Just like, yeah, well.
So he gets 400 concubines to stand in the courtyard. King's looking on this little balcony. I mean, I don't know. Probably not, but yeah, he's looking down.
It's a nice image, yeah.
Yeah, he's looking down on the balcony, and Sun Tzu basically says, right, your 2 top concubines, I'm going to make them officers, and I'm going to relay some instructions. So you look forward, look left, look right, to the sound of a drum, and all the concubines are like, okay, we understand. So he issues the first order, and they all just start pissing themselves and rolling about and giggling and shit. And
classic concubine behaviour there.
Yeah. And then so basically the king's like, oh, that's shit, isn't it? You can't do anything. So he's like, okay, right, well, so it might be the general's fault, so it might be my fault, because maybe I didn't put the instructions out clearly enough.
Can I just step in? That's some fucking stoic, extreme ownership behaviour. Hey, it's not the concubine's fault, it's my fault.
Yeah, so
it's the right way of thinking about things.
So he blames himself first, and he says, okay, so let's just check it's not my fault. So I'll reiterate the instructions, and they do still understand. So he's like, okay, go again. So they all just piss about again and start like laughing and rolling around the floor. So then he says, right, so it's the chain of command then goes down, so it's the officer's fault. So he gets the 2 head concubines and like chops their heads off. And the king's like, whoa, what are you doing? What are you doing? It's my favourite concubines, mate. And he's like, well, yeah, you said I had complete control. So he's like, oh shit, I did. Oh no.
Sun Tzu making those moves.
Yeah. So, and then he does it again, and everything works perfectly because they understand the situation now. So there's a few things that we can kind of get from that about his philosophy of war.
It was total.
Yeah, so he views people as kind of machines, like well-oiled machines. It's kind of like he does have this human element.
I don't know. There's some quotes later on where he says a couple of things like one of the ways of failing. There's like 5 main ways of failing. You can either be like too rush, you can either be too cowardly, or you can think there's an opportunity and go for it. And you can be overly solicitous to your men, which is like too nice to your men, which kind of supports what you're saying. But then also he has a really good point which talks about if you do not treat your men with humanity and niceness at the beginning, they will never follow any order that you say later on. And also like punishment that you have later on will not have any impact.
It's still very utilitarian because he's... it's like carrot and the stick. He wants a result out of it. He's all about results.
I guess, but I'm going to say that story's probably not 100% viable.
No, I know, but there's obviously a reason why it exists, and I think one of the other reasons is because he believes that once the general's given his position and given out his orders by the king, he's no longer kind of culpable to the king. The hierarchy. It's not really a question of hierarchy. He's not under the king. He's not over the king. He's not to the side of the king. He's just following out his orders.
There was another cool bit which is he's talking about total like if I go back to the head thing, there was a thing he says here. When you lay down a law, see that it's not disobeyed. If it is disobeyed, the offender must be put to death. So that supports your point of view. And also this leads on to this story of a guy called Tao, where he actually he was so obsessed with like not messing up the countryside and not harming any civilians that he put himself to death because his horse rode through some field of corn. He ran his horse through a field of corn. He went, "Oh yeah, I've got to kill myself."
Is that true?
You have to kill him. No, this is all like quick.
Yeah,
this is all.
Yeah.
And then later on, apparently his officers managed to persuade him to having a haircut. And it's like, oh, I don't believe any of that sentence, but it's that idea. It's the idea that if you have something set in stone, like okay, this is a punishment, you need to actually follow it up with something, because then if you have something and it doesn't have teeth, then that's how you sort of lose discipline. So I think that sort of supports it. But then also he's talking later on about how the main point is to make sure you don't get your troops killed, which can be interpreted as your life as wasting energy, and making sure that the troops actually like and respect you because they are going to be sort of following your orders, and your lives can be based on theirs as well.
Well, should we talk a little bit about what's actually in the book? So it's like 13 chapters.
Yep.
And they're all like...
You can read it in literally like 40 minutes.
Yeah,
it's pretty legit.
Quite small. And they're all like instructions, basically, different elements of warfare. And so one of them's like on, I think the last one's on like spies. And
the last one's the spies. It's on like, organisation, moving, tactics, attacking with fire, which I think is probably like a direct translation problem where it's probably just like, attacking well or attacking strong or something like that.
Well, I've got 3 different translations up at the moment. But yeah,
this is the problem with the Art of War. It's just like, it's less like an actual book as it is like a piece of myth.
Oh yeah, so that attack by fire thing, that's got
how many different words have we got?
The fiery attack and incendiary attacks.
Okay.
Incendiary attack.
I think it just means attacking with fire, doesn't it? But it just seems weird to me that like everything else is about like movement, and then you got a very specific chapter on attacking with fire.
Yeah, so you got like manoeuvring an army, variation of tactics, use of energy, attack by stratagem. It's things like surveying the terrain as well. So you can see how it's kind of useful and applicable to things like a football team.
Yeah. My favourite thing, which is like, this is the way he starts off the book, is it just comes up straight out with a list about like, here's the 5 things you need to do to be a good commander. And like the first one, you need to have humanity or benevolence.
Oh, you did send me these.
Yeah, I sent you some of these, I think. You need to have uprightness of mind, self-respect, self-control, or proper feeling. The phrase proper feeling is a bit of a weird one in there, but I get the whole self-respect.
It's kind of interesting because he's a Taoist. He's obviously writing at the same time as people like Confucius.
Yeah, he talks about it in his book, saying this should not be taken as like a school away from Confucianism. This is not like a complete, total view, but this is just like a practical guide to how you should wage war, and therefore sort of your life as well.
Yeah.
But he's not claiming this is like a spiritual answer. And he talks about also you need to have, in the first chapter it talks about having it's like the moral you need to abide by moral laws, in which he talks about Lao Tzu and like a little bit of Taoism as well.
Yeah, so you say it shouldn't be taken as a spiritual thing. It's not that it's incongruent to the spiritual ideas of the day.
Yeah,
it's separate.
It's almost like underneath, isn't it? It's like if you have Taoism on top, this is almost like
this is a part of it. So he agrees with like most of the other schools of thought at the time that war is not actually ideal. He doesn't glorify war, which is the interesting thing about this book.
And there's a really good quote later on, which is one of the 14, which is like to win in all your battles is not supreme excellence. The supreme excellence is to win without ever having a battle, and make sure that your enemy's strategies get taken down before they can ever talk about it. So he's this idea of Sun Tzu just being like this, or it's the same way as like this reminds me a lot of The Prince by Machiavelli, where people haven't read the book and then they just presume a load of shit about it, which is me sticking up for Machiavelli a bit. But it's like...
No, I have the same thing with Nietzsche.
Yeah, it's like...
not a fascist.
It's like Nietzsche just wants the world to die. It's like an emo, and you're like, well, you haven't read it, dude.
Yeah,
just chill out.
It's neither a fascist or an anarchist.
It's like, yeah, we get it. You saw a thing on YouTube, and now you are Nietzsche.
You saw Wisecrack.
I didn't want to call them out, but yeah, Wisecrack, if you're listening, we're coming for you.
I think they corrected that, but yeah.
Yeah, they probably should have sorted out. My favourite thing here, Sun Tzu, he talks about if the circumstance is favourable, one should modify one's plans. A true soldier will have none of the bookish theoretical knowledge, and he then also cautions us to underpin our faith in abstract principles. So it's literally, this is like the first section of the book. He goes, okay, a good commander must be these 5 things. Don't listen to this book. If you try and don't listen to this book, but if you take these principles as set in stone, you're never going to be able to achieve anything. The whole point is about reading the situation at hand and then reacting to it.
Yeah, there's a fluidity in it.
There's no such thing as like, if A, then do B. These are just sort of like overriding general rules, which I think is the reason why it's so applicable to sort of thinking and so many aspects outside of like warfare.
Yeah, one thing that kind of struck me is like in Eastern philosophy in general, I'll call it philosophy very broadly.
Yeah.
There's this idea of like cultivation of craft and things, like the kind of like you have a certain discipline and you just try and perfect that, and that in itself is like a form of philosophy. It's like
it's back to Musashi, where he's talking about the way, and he talks about the way, and he says, I cannot tell you the way. You will not gain the way from reading this book, the Book of 5 Rings. You will know what your way is only by the fact that you have taken your foot off the path. You know when you've taken your foot off the path of the way, you know, what feels wrong and what feels right. And then he talks about if you take a divergent step, or if you take in someone else's point of view, there's some people, this is why I think Musashi is quite interesting to read, because it's like, if you take on someone else's point of view...
This is the 5 rings thing,
yeah. That doesn't mean that you've deviated from your path. You don't have to go, I'm a strict Taoist, and therefore I can't talk to a Christian because my path is Taoism. Musashi's talking about how if you take an idea from someone else and incorporate that into your schema, that doesn't mean that you're moving from the path of the way. That means you're taking in other ideas.
Yeah.
And also he talks about Musashi, he talks about how he was like Musashi was basically like a sword fighter. He won like over 80 duels. He's basically like a hero, like a legend in Japanese history, but he did actually exist. So unlike Sun Tzu, who's a bit sort of nebulous, he's actually a real person who just like killed loads of people and formed like a sword fighting school. But what was interesting about him was the fact that he didn't have a teacher, and he learnt from incorporating everything else. He literally just spent time in the mountains, and just like went through the sort of classic tropes of like Japanese swordsmen just like studying rivers and all this crap. And it's, do you know what I mean? Like all these classic things you'd put in a Bruce Lee film, and it's like he was very much about crafting your individual way and incorporating many things into that way.
Yeah, but I quite like the way that the way is it's a verb. It's
abstract. Yeah, it's part of living.
It's something you do, and that's something in Western philosophy that we're still trying to wrap our heads around, because we've got all this abstract language from people like Plato and Aristotle, and we've kind of
we're bound by it.
Yeah, it's coming back with ideas like virtue ethics and stoicism, but still, like the idea that a philosophy is something that's lived, it's something that's transformative, and something you do.
Do you want to know how to truly be at one with the way? And these, what I love about these statements are they're all impossible. It's like they're all impossible. It's like Sisyphus rolling the stone up the hill. It's impossible, but it's something for you to do. It's something for you to aim for. So do not think dishonestly is number one from Musashi. Just like, okay, I think that's a really important thing too. It's not even like do not speak dishonestly. It's like try and evaluate things for what they are, and try and see like the truth in situations. Try to be aware of your cognitive bias. Try to be aware of being in an echo chamber, trying to evaluate things properly.
Yeah, I think all religions and philosophies in terms of like doctrines or even things that aren't doctrines like humanism, they have this like ideal that you should strive towards.
Yeah.
That's virtually,
like Christ and Christianity.
It's impossible. Like, but it's a benchmark, and I think Christians would be probably more inclined to sort of beat themselves up over the fact they can't achieve this ideal. Not that they expect to achieve the ideal, but they live in a constant thing of like, oh damn it, I'm never going to be this ideal.
Yeah, it's straight perpetual.
Yeah, but with humanism, it's like, okay, you're never going to be this ideal, and that's fine. We're all flawed, we're all human, but there's the ideal anyway. Like you can kind of work towards it if you want. Well,
but that's the idea. It's like there's the ideal, rather than you know what the ideal is, and you know when you're not living the ideal. You know when you've stepped off the path of the way, and I do like the sort of the verb nature of it. And the second point of the way is in training, which is just in, like you were saying, picking a craft and just absolutely focusing on that or becoming excellent in that. So that's the second point, which is quite different from thou shalt not. It's very, very non-prescriptive.
And it's very
how like the way is in training.
They are a little bit like it's just like a collection of mantras and ideas. It's interesting to kind of exploring his pacifism. He doesn't idolize war. He doesn't want war. He thinks that war is basically a last resort. And there are parts of where he's like, I think that you should try and maintain and like keep strong allies. You should use diplomacy where possible. You should even submit to a bigger enemy temporarily, if it's going to help you survive. But then there's also parts where he's like, you need to utterly destroy an enemy, like utterly just.
If you have to.
Yeah.
If there's a point where it comes to it, because it's better to do that, and it's like the thing he's talking about is just like it's better for your men.
Yeah,
it's like you. I think there was the point for like if you have like 1 to every 10 of their men, you should surround them. If you have ones every two, you should have one battalion and then another to do. So it's basically something to do something normal, something to do something sneaky. If you have one
all
on one,
warfare is based on deception.
All warfare is these are the quotes that you get at the bottom of Rome Total War, where it's just like all warfare is based on
when you
deception.
die in Call of Duty 3.
Oh yeah. You get like a little thing for it.
Yeah. What's the
talking about that? So the quote, it would be like, knowing the place and the time for coming back, we may concentrate from the greatest distances in order to fight. And then he goes on to say, choose your battles carefully, expend the energy only where you have to. So it's like...
And from this kind of thing, you can see where you could really apply it into everyday life. There's another one which is, if you know the enemy and know yourself...
Yes, the classic one.
Yeah, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Well, I mean, all these quotes are a little bit paraphrased and they've changed and everything. It's very hard to translate from a totally different language. It's like the root is fundamentally different. So it's like, it's not going to be completely analogous meaning. But yeah, I quite like that because it's like the whole know yourself, know thyself thing.
It's Descartes, isn't it? I had underneath that, I highlighted and I had it Descartes question mark woke quote of the year as well. It's like, it is about, and Sun Tzu again is about knowing yourself, and he has an awesome quote which is somewhat along the lines of, in order to gain victory, first of all, the first thing you do is put yourself beyond the possibility of defeat, and then you wait for the enemy to make a mistake. So it's like you never actually gain your victory. And he talks about being victorious in the field. A victorious army then seeks battle. Any army that seeks battle and then sort of figures out if it's going to be victorious will never actually be victorious. You should only go into a battle when you know 100% the outcome and 100% that you will win or you'll be positive from this. Because it's like, why would you go in with like a flip of the coin thing?
There's a lot of optimism in it as well, which is like another thing people can get from it. Maybe it's basically saying like, if you follow this stuff, you will win. Doesn't matter. You could be like 1 against 100. If you understand all this correctly, and it's like, again, understanding it, it's like it's not like
internal
X to Y. It's like if you
can you be able to apply this?
If you can apply this correctly, you will win. He's like a very good underdog general.
There's a fantastic quote here which I need to quickly skim through. Where he talks about you may know how to conquer and still not be able to do it, which is a really good like undercut of his whole principles, because he starts the book saying, if you do this you will win, and then he's got that sort of get out where it's like the no true Scotsman fallacy. It's like, oh, you lost, oh, you didn't do it properly, and it's like, oh, okay, we get it. But then he says like it's like an example that I was thinking of was Hannibal Barca. You know, when he led all the troops through the
guy with the elephants.
Is to do with the elephants, yeah. So he basically, Carthaginian general, led a surprise attack through the Alps. Fucking loads of people died, and he had a really famous battle called Cannae, where he used one of these sort of ideas from here to lure out the generals and then crush them, and then he went to march on to Rome. But then something happened, which is going back to the quote of, you may know how to conquer, but not be able to do it. He then decided, instead of attacking Rome, he was going to wait, and then he attacked a place called Capua, and then eventually he got surrounded there and got cut off. And it's like, imagine what history, or how history would have turned out if he'd made that other choice, if he'd attacked Rome at that point. So he'd gained this massive victory from Cannae. He'd used all the right strategies in order to get it, and then he went, oh, I don't feel like I can get Rome this year or whatever. Went away, and then eventually lost support, people died, ran out of food, and he sort of got slowly defeated. So it's and he talks about, Sun Tzu talks about, he says, first way you can win is by being too reckless. The second way you can win is by being too cowardly. And it says the Chinese word cowardly here literally translates as the man whose timidity prevents him from advancing to seize an advantage. Which is like, that's pretty fucking harsh in Chinese, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like you could be cowardly just by doing nothing. And I think that's a big lesson that we can all take away, or that we could all probably do with now, is the idea of doing nothing is seen as a sort of zero-sum state, isn't it? Where I'm only doing nothing, I'm standing still. It's like, no, actually,
it's like this whole
you're
idea
actually
that
going backwards.
Abstaining is still a choice.
Yeah.
So I quite like that in a moral context. It's like if you abstain to help someone, I think I said drowning in a pond.
Yeah, you've made that choice. You haven't just gone, You haven't. That's not morally neutral.
Yeah,
it's
when
not
you
morally
don't
neutral
give
to do
the
that.
beggar, that's still that's a choice you've just made not to do that.
Sam Harris says we don't have brains. But it's I literally read that line. I was like, wow, Sun Tzu's harsh. He's not fucking around. It's
Speaking of harsh, like, so he wants to win it pretty much any cost. He has some kind of morality. He has some interest in moral questions outside of this.
Yeah, I think so as well.
War context as well.
I think you'd kind of have to, wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, yeah. Like he doesn't.
He's not leading an army of robots.
Yeah. But what do you think he would have thought of war crimes in like a more modern context and like nuclear weapons and shit? What do you?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is like one of these things where.
It's like saying, well, what would Nietzsche have thought of the internet?
I don't know.
It's like, well, does it matter in one sense? Like.
Oh yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But also, like, what would Sun Tzu have thought of war now? He'd probably be pretty happy. We don't really have that many wars. Like compared to the Seven Kingdoms, where literally every generation there was a new iteration of like the divine king who was just like slaughtering people in order to try and fight to get to unified China.
Yeah,
it's like
he'd probably
be like, oh, this is quite nice.
Yeah, it's like a whimsical tale about chopping the heads off concubines. It's like, it's a pretty brutal time.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, we don't... And I guess we kind of stop wars before they happen, and like the whole spy diplomacy
which is that's classic Sun Tzu. It's like to defeat your enemies is not supreme excellence. It's to stop his strategy before there's even been a war, there's even been any sort of combat going on. So I think in that way, nuclear weapons might be like the ultimate Sun Tzu thing, because it's literally just like, okay, there can't now be a war between Russia and America, because if there was, it's going to be so big, it's going to be absolutely total. So it's almost like that idea of stopping the strategy before it happens.
So what about things like honour and killing civilians and stuff?
He doesn't mention that.
No.
He doesn't mention that. He just talks about he just literally talks about winning battles.
So there's no idea of like chivalry in this, or
there's not a lot of chivalry going on. In fact, like the fact that he's talking about, like, he talks about two others. He has this really cool section where he goes like, there are only 5 musical notes, which is like, it's not really true, Sun Tzu. But also, but they can make any number of millions of melodies, you'll never be able to hit it. Or there's only 5 cardinal tastes, but they can make all sorts of dishes, more than you'll ever be able to taste. Or 5 primary colours, more colours than you can ever see. There's only 2 types of warfare. There's like direct attack and indirect attack. And that's literally his advice. And then he talks about how like you should have direct and indirect working at the same time, and what may seem to be direct can be indirect, and what may seem to be indirect can be direct.
It's an oversimplification, but if you apply it the right way,
you don't want to be like, if situation 1 is happening, do 2, because it's this idea to take these sort of principles, like he talks about not attacking like strong positions, like not arguing with someone who's got a really cohesive point about something, or attacking weak points with your strong point. And it's like, if you can see that, if you can see if you see the way broadly to direct that, you can then sort of creatively apply that to your life and take those elements, which are quite like basic really, and then apply those to situations you're in. But no, as far as killing civilians or chivalry, that's not in there. So I imagine if Sun Tzu could gain an advantage by killing other civilians, probably get done.
I think it's not. It's obviously not a comprehensive text. No. So I think, and if you take into account his Taoism, I'm pretty sure he would have lines he would draw. I think so. Yeah, it's like I imagine it'd be like, what do you gain from it? Maybe. So it'd be like he talks about things about like if you go into an enemy's territory, you should feed on the enemy. You should take like all their food and stuff like that. But then he also talks about interesting points. I guess he does talk about that, because he talks about, if you capture an enemy's battalion, that is so much better than killing them. And if you capture them, they should be treated nice and fairly, and they should be fed. Because then that's so demoralising to the enemy. That's like a method. And he does that because there's a reason to do it. I think he's separate. I think he's just separating war from his Taoism. I think
he must do, because it's not a very Taoist thing to do, is it? To go out.
Yeah. But then you think of like Bushido samurai. It's like, well, that's not a very Buddhist thing to do.
Yeah, it's a bit intense.
It's like, there's a lot.
That's the next antiquated Japanese book for me to get my head around.
Yeah.
It's like the going into battle thinking you're already dead, and it's like, what? What does that even mean? The crazy people.
So yeah, just before we end, I wanted to talk about the legacy of the book.
Before we end ourselves, yeah.
I wanted to talk about the how this book's kind of the cultural legacy of it.
It's before we invade Gloucestershire, and we just go, yeah, Sun Tzu, got it. Where are my concubines? It's right as an army.
So yeah, it was part of it was part of 7 military classics that basically survived all these book burnings. It was compiled into this 7 books.
Oh, was it? What were the other ones? On War and
yeah.
Machiavelli wrote The Art of War. Like he literally just got The Art of War and basically wrote it again with modern historical sort of points backing up and stuff.
Yeah, but it's so crazy that this book is like just still around. It's so important because in a lot of countries in East Asia, obviously China being one of them, you have to read this book to get a job in the military. It's on the reading list.
Yeah, I think it's fair enough to be.
Yeah, and it's on the Royal Marines, no, the Marine Corps for the US. It's on their reading list as well. It's in like pretty much every military library in the world. Pretty big.
And it's the fact that it's so simple, and like the first time I went to Reddit, I was like rubbing my hands. It's like, this is it. I've played a couple games of Civ 5. Let's get my Sun Tzu on. This was like what, like 8 years ago.
Medieval Total
10
War.
years. Oh yeah, back in the day, Rome. What is it? Rome Gold Edition, mate. I was like, I've got this. Let's get my Sun Tzu on. And Reddit was like, this book's shit. Literally, my first thought was just like, this is just crap. Like I thought this is gonna be like a if A then B sort of thing, you know. But it is a bit more. It is a bit more like sort of. I wouldn't say like philosophical or like spiritual, but it is a bit more vague. There's a bit more sort of like, you should kind of do this, aim to achieve this. But I'm not going to tell you how to do it because there isn't a way that you'll be able to apply to your life or to warfare or whatever.
Do you know any like famous people that used the book?
George Washington. I know he's a big fan of that book. I think Rommel as well. He had a copy of it. Field Marshal Montgomery talks about quoting The Art of War as well.
Yeah, World War II was like a big. Everyone was reading it.
Yeah, I guess because you could have a copy in your pocket. Yeah, and this is what I think. This is what I think makes The Art of War so applicable to your everyday life, is because it's so short, and the ideas are so simple and so concise that it's like, yeah, you can easily apply this to sort of everyday activities. It's like one of the things was you should like the least form of effective combat is to assail walled cities or sieges, and it's like, how often do we do that in arguments? Well, we'll have an argument with someone like, no, your point's wrong. And they're like, no, I'm really dug in. You go, no, your point's wrong. And let's say like you're arguing with someone about this, and then all you're doing is making like the relationship bad. But you're so focused on like engaging and I will win this point, my point is better. And it's like, okay, you're besieging a walled place there. They've got their arguments in.
Yeah, it's like you could win, but it's gonna take so much effort.
Yeah,
and like you could
so many of your troops are gonna die.
Yeah.
Like so much of your energy troops. And like even if you do win, this is what Sun Tzu's talking about, like to win in all battles is not supreme excellence. It's like, okay, what was the point of that battle? And they talk about that in the Marine Corps, one of the Marine Corps books, which I think it paraphrases Sun Tzu. It talks how like you should not fight the battle for the battle. If you can win by not fighting any battles at all, that's the best thing to do. So it's like, if in this situation where you're arguing with a person, you should set up in such a way that you never have that argument, so that you're not wasting energy, because even if you win that battle, some of your troops are going to die. You're going to make that relationship a bit more sort of stagnant. Whatever that could be, it could just be like a boss at work. Where you're like, I'm really digging on this point, and they're digging in, and you go, okay, I've just wasted time. I've just lost a load of troops.
Well, that's the thing. It's just so useful because it's just about not oversimplifying problems, despite the fact that it is in this very simple format. It basically encourages you to think very dynamically, to not oversimplify a situation, and to like evaluate all of your assets. You know, I was thinking, how am I gonna like relate this book to wider philosophy or like my life or anything?
Yeah, it's like, oh, you shit, they just come popping out.
Yeah, and I went over to Waterstones to get this book, and I was like, oh, it's a really tiny book. It'll probably be like £3 or whatever. I got to Waterstones for once rather than like a second-hand bookshop.
Was it?
It was like £11. I bought it, and then like got out of the shop. I was like, why did I do that? I can get like a version with like multiple translations and like this big like a...
Get a PDF online for free.
Yeah, I know. I wanted a physical copy.
I'm probably gonna buy one on the way out here today, just because it's cool to have a talisman. Like.
So I was just like, I just had to go through the whole thing of like, oh yeah, it was for a mate, and he got it for his birthday. He didn't want to look twat, so I refunded it. And I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna get like a version that's actually been places, like a second-hand book that's got like a couple of translations in it, and like your thing at the start. But this like
notes on the side and shit.
Yeah, it's like I really do believe in like I try and get second-hand books as often as possible. And I was just like, if I'd have been a bit more like Sun Tzu,
yes.
if I'd have surveyed the battlefield a little bit.
If you'd known yourself and you'd know the enemy is Waterstones.
Yeah.
There's a really cool thing. You were just wasting energy, you're wasting troops, you weren't thinking about what you're doing.
Wasting £11.
Or what was the reason? What was the that he talks about? You should not spend your troops to capture. You should not spend the troops that you would use to capture a town, like a fortified town, when you could have just captured an easier province. So it's like you're using less troops in the form of money to get the same, or to get like an even greater thing.
What's kind of a testament to how popular this book has become, or how influential it's become?
It's an artifact though. It really is. If you talk to anyone about the art of war, they'll probably go, I mean, this is just like literally a bloke in the pub would be like, oh, what? The art of war, I know what that is. Yeah.
So I was reading it. It was used by Mao.
Yeah, Mao.
Yeah.
His big thing was superior forces. If the enemy has a superior force, evade them. Just a big part of Mao's guerrilla tactics.
Influenced a lot of guerrillas. Yeah.
And the Viet Cong in Vietnam as well.
Yeah, because obviously, if you take all the people that were influenced by Mao and the fact that how Mao took on these ideas, it was like a big thing for him. By extension, Sun Tzu has influenced all these people. And it's just crazy to think that it's influencing guerrilla fighters today. It's like, oh shit, that's...
But that sort of leads back to the point at the start, which is like, well, how come we haven't remembered these things? And the thing we were talking about Sun Tzu not being a person, but Sun Tzu this is basically just a book about common sense, where this is just like, this is the common sense things that we need reminding of. And I think like you could do a lot worse things in life than literally read one of these quotes every morning and be like, cool, I'm just going to apply this to like how I'm thinking or something like that. And it's just like, we all know what we need to do. We just need to sort of be reminded of those facts, or reminded of those easier ways to think. I don't know if that makes sense, but like the way you're saying about Chairman Mao applying Sun Tzu, it's like, yeah, because it's fucking logical. It makes sense.
Well, there was obviously this book, give another bit more history, is it took off in Japan as much as China, really. The Japanese were using it a lot, and the samurai really took it on, and then later on the Japanese Imperial Army were using it. And there was a general who, this is probably at the time when the Jesuits and the Dutch were coming to Japan, I think, sort of Shogun era, when muskets would have been around. He evaded the use of guns and still won pretty much every battle, and he said his invincibility was down to reading and studying the art of war. But so yeah, it's the
that's the thing. That's the key difference. Is the difference between reading and studying, and it's like that's the whole thing that I liked about Musashi and I liked about Sun Tzu is to go, cool, read this book. You're not going to know anything. You're going to know how to conquer, but not how to do it. To study it is to internalize it and to live and breathe it, which I think this guy must have done. Not like how it's used in the Gulf War, where it's like, you know, people are just like, yeah, I've read that, and it's Sun Tzu says, and then like completely disobeying like loads of the principles.
Because that got widely criticised, the way they would quote the art of war in the Gulf War. It's like, I can kind of see why. I think maybe they were probably putting too much ethics on Sun Tzu's ideas, which is why I wanted to figure that out earlier.
What were they saying? I don't know anything about what they were saying about the
Gulf War. Just that it was a decontextualised application of.
So what were they doing in the Gulf War and then calling it back to the art war?
Just like bombing shit, like just like
that's your attacks by fire. Sun Tzu literally, I think the passage they have is like, yeah, if there's an enemy below you should just fucking throw fire on him. Maybe they were just going, yeah, we like this bit, and you just find they've got like a whatever the equivalent of pattern was at the time, just got that circled and underlined like.
Yeah, but I mean, of all the theories of war, it's staggering how this one is so popular compared to all the others. So like, obviously, it's not the first book of its kind, really. And like when you think of, I don't know about the chronology of it, but there are certainly other books on war. Like Saint Augustine was obviously a lot after, but he did the whole just war theory, which was taken on by Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah.
If you're in sixth form, whatever, you'd just be sick to death of just war theory, because it's the only one that I learned, and it's literally just like, go to war for the right reasons. Go to. I mean,
it's why you should, not what you should do.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference. But then, I don't know. There's elements of that in Plato when he talks about the role of a state and war, and how important war is to our culture, and obviously people like Alexander the Great. It's like kind of completely different, because it's this idea of heroism in war.
Yeah,
this guy hates.
There's so many different points where like they had you've wandered into a fucking minefield now, mate. Talking about Alexander the Great. Don't worry, this isn't going on for 3 hours. Kind of nervously looked at the recording and went, oh shit, we've only got like 17 foot of tape. You can't talk about fucking Alexander the Great. But they had he was like the foil to that. So they had Parmenion, who was like the old general, and he would always be like, well, Alexander, they sure have a lot of troops. We shouldn't fight them. And then Alexander was like, no, we're just going to fight them. And then they won, because Alexander's a god and he's a king and he's amazing. And he's a myth. And it's like...
Sun Tzu would have hated the idea of heroism, because one thing, he doesn't want to glorify battle. Also, he thinks that everybody should have their place. There's no room for insubordination in his well-oiled machine.
Oh, I don't know. There's a quote in there where he says that there are some armies which must not be fought, there are some rivers that must not be crossed, there are some commands from the sovereign which must not be followed. And Napoleon, if you read Napoleon's writings on war as well, Napoleon and Sun Tzu in the story cuts off 2 concubines' heads for being disobedient, supposedly absolutely total on orders, like everything down. And even he writes, and Napoleon writes as well in his books, yeah, there's certain orders you just shouldn't follow if it's wrong to do, but it's up to you as the general to interpret that. If you're at work and someone told you to do something that put you in a dangerous position, you're destroying some documents with like some important information on them, and you go, no.
I remember when
I don't know when I'm destroying important documents.
I don't know. I got told to burn a load of recyclable cardboard.
There's some orders from the sovereign that must not be obeyed.
I think it was at the same place that you worked as our first ever job.
Oh yeah.
And they told us to
shout out Bill.
Yeah, and Bill was like, oh yes, Connor, could you go and burn some of this cardboard? It's loads, absolutely loads of cardboard. And I was like, do you want to recycle that? And he's like, I don't believe in all that. It's
made up with carnage. Just remember that there's some orders from this. That's the point you should have turned around and been like, there's some orders that come from the sovereign that must not be obeyed, and then you just walk away and throw some fucking Chinese 5 spice in his eyes and then like piss off around the corner. Read it. It's 40 minutes of your life. You lazy fucks.